Claude is putting an invisible watermark inside the text it generates. We're talking about all the text, all of the code. Anything that you write using Claude going forward will be identified as Claude generated. The reason for this is the EU AI Act. The effect is worldwide. It doesn't matter if you're in the UK, the US, or the rest of the world outside of the EU, this applies to you. And Anthropic have now explained how it plans to mark Claude output so that they can be detected as AI processed, and the internet is not very happy. Text is going to get an embedded watermark. Supported files are going to get provenance metadata, and this has pissed a lot of people off. I'm going to pull up a tweet. This is from Nick. This now has nearly 12 million views and a lot of irate responses. Just in, Claude models will now have invisible watermarks embedded in all text and all metadata attached to files. A lot of people are very angry about this. This is not quite true. The headline doing the rounds is too broad. This does not mean that every response from every Claude model is definitely watermarked and publicly detectable today. There is a lot of dumb stuff going around being said, and I want to make sure that you don't sound like a dumbass. So we're going to be covering the actuality of the situation. First up, let's look at what Anthropic have actually said. Let's go straight to the horse's mouth. Anthropic say the new Claude models launched in the EU on or after the 2nd of August support marking from day one. So moving forward from this point, all new models will mark AI generated content from day one. Claude models launched in the EU on or after August 2nd will support machine-readable marking at launch. Generated text will carry embedded watermarks, and generated files will include digitally signed provenance metadata where supported. Now, this is going to be across the platform. It is at the model level. And technical documentation and the detection tools are still coming. We don't actually know the details of this. So anybody who is spouting off about how this works, they don't necessarily know all of these details. So the technical documentations and detection tools are not yet released. They should be in the coming weeks, so we'll actually know what we're working with here. This is a real product change. It just needs the caveats left attached so you don't sound stupid when you are talking about this, because it's a relatively complicated issue. So the important distinction was between deployer versus provider. In this case, Anthropic is the provider of AI systems. Most of us in the day-to-day, we are deployers and we are using these tools professionally. Mixing this up is the root cause of most of the misunderstanding that I have seen on. Let's actually pull up Article 50, and in particular, the part of Article 50 that is causing issues now with the watermarking. It is Article 50, Part 2. I don't know what you call it. Yeah, Part 2. We'll call it Part 2. This is what is causing the current outrage with Anthropic. So providers of AI system, including general purpose AI systems, Anthropic, Claude, generating synthetic audio, image, video, or text contents shall ensure that the outputs of the AI system are marked in a machine-readable format. That's important, and detectable as artificially generated or manipulated. So this is what is causing the watermarking furore right now, and it's very important to realize that this is different to a lot of the other parts that we talked about on Monday. Again, so what we covered on Monday was the more abstract legal duty, and Anthropic has now shown us the product version, and this is what is causing people to flip out. This is what is causing people to get very upset, because Claude is going to be marking their AI content. Now, super important caveat here. This is not just Anthropic. So as Andrew Curran has pointed out, a lot of companies, most of the American companies, bar one, have agreed that they're going to be complying with the EU regulations. So on OpenAI's support page, updated 9 days ago regarding text watermarking, Anthropic, OpenAI, Google, Meta, Microsoft, and Mistral all signed the EU Code of Practice on transparency of AI-generated content, so all must invisibly watermark their text. So OpenAI specifically said, consistent with our commitments under the European Commission's Code of Practice on transparency of AI-generated content, our goal is to expand provenance signals to all modalities, including text, so customers and developers have a clear way to meet their own transparency obligations to the EU as standards and toolings continue to mature. They have not got it in place at OpenAI, but they will probably have so before the hard deadline, which is in December. So new laws. OpenAI have been smarter. They committed to it before, and they're going to wait for their rollout, probably waiting for Anthropic to do this. And Google did this all the way back in 2024. They've been doing this for years. So it's not just Anthropic. Okay, let's have a look what this actually means. So there are two different jobs and two different marks that are going to be put in place. Anthropic have described two systems. So let's pull up their specific article. There are going to be two, here we go. Embedded watermarks in text is the first of the methods, and the second is signed provenance metadata. So the watermark embedded directly into the generated text is something you cannot see when you are looking at an output. Whether it's code, whether it's text, whether it's a story, whether it's an email, you cannot see. It is a watermark that is embedded into the text. Anthropic says it will not change the quality, the meaning, or the readability of the text. We're going to have to look at that in a moment because of how it is generated. And the second is signed provenance metadata. This is going to be basically something that is appended to files like SVGs, PNGs, JPEGs, or text files following the C2PA standard. And the easiest way to remember these two different types of markings is that one travels inside of the words, inside of the text itself, and the other one will travel with the file if you export it, if you bring it out of the system. Now, I'm only going to be focusing on the embedded watermarks in the text, primarily because metadata can be stripped easily in Starter. So we're going to be focusing instead on the watermarks. That is also what is pissing a lot of people off. Now, we need to talk about what this watermark is. It is going to be applied at the model level. So Anthropic have specifically said that the mark travels with the text when you copy and paste it. So you can't just copy and paste it out and hope that that is going to disappear. The word here, though, that Anthropic use, which is may. Anthropic has not published the technical method yet. We're going to get in the next couple of weeks. So anyone confidently explaining the exact trick that Anthropic are going to be using, they are speculating at this point. What we are fairly certain about, though, is this is not just going to be some very crude adding of invisible text. We're not like adding white text onto a white background like we used to do in old search engine optimization. This is not inserting Claude wrote this into the text itself. No, it is structural to the language itself that is being used. There is a very good explanation of how these type of systems work. So he's saying basically for watermark detection, we are generating tokens and we're adding a small kind of sorting. So using that hash to randomly reweight the probabilities for the n+1, the next token, and then sample from that new distribution. In the simple case, you could split 50% of all English words into a green or red set based on your hash and boost the probability of words in the green set. And then we could look for whether or not there were more words in the green set in order to see whether this is written by artificial intelligence. So there's some complicated stuff going on in here. What it's going to be doing, though, is changing the structure, the choice of words, the choice of phraseology, the structure of the sentences, the structure of the paragraph, very, very slightly, in weighting it, additional weights on the text output, which gives it that flavor. It gives it that signature. Now, what he is saying, and this is a guy who knows an awful lot more about this, he says, doesn't this make the text much worse? The answer is yes, it does. For most people, it's imperceptible, since there are exponentially more ways to write the same paragraph, but it is going to have an impact on the final output. This is particularly important in code, where making these small weighting tweaks may degrade the code itself. If you're writing an email and a different word is chosen or a slightly different sentence pattern, probably doesn't matter. In code, though, that's a big problem. That is a massive problem, and one that I'm sure people are going to be extremely upset about. Now, I will put, but remember, this is not new stuff. So Google has been marking their text since the early 2024. So they've publicly explained how SynthID text adjusts tokens probabilities during generation whilst they're creating your answer. And that gives us an example of what Anthropic system could look like. One thing, super, super important, because I'm seeing a lot of people from outside of the EU saying, well, this doesn't matter. I don't need to pay any attention to this. I'm not in the EU. I can't believe that they're continuing to hamstring themselves and mess up their AI development. This is a global development. This is not just the EU. So first of all, the AI Act itself can reach companies outside of the EU when the output of their AI systems is used inside of the EU. So that has a massive effect on Anthropic, for example, because they have a choice. They can either stop providing their models to the EU and lose quite a lot of money in doing so, or they can play by the rules and adapt their systems to work inside of the EU. Just because you're seeing something similar with the AI companies. This is what we need to be really careful about. Just because you have a mark on your work, on your code, does not mean that Claude created it from scratch. We need to talk about false positives here because it's the most dangerous part. This is especially dangerous for employers, schools, and clients, because a lot of people are going to be accused of using artificial intelligence when perhaps they used it to summarize, perhaps they used it to help them polish up the grammar. The watermark is still going to be added. That is a huge, huge problem. So the detected mark means that not that the Claude has been used to generate de novo from scratch, but that it has been processed at some point with Claude. So processed and authored will both get the watermark. So I saw this tweet from, here we go, Peter Harrell says, if I read Anthropic's new watermarking policy correctly, not only will Claude watermark text it writes as AI, fair enough. If I upload text I write and ask Claude to copy edit it, Claude will now watermark my human written AI copy edited text as AI, which seems ridiculous. As soon as it touches Claude, as soon as it touches artificial intelligence, it's going to get marked. That's going to be a problem. You've translated your own article into a different language. You might summarize meeting notes that you have created, or convert a file from one format to another. Doing any of these actions inside of Claude will lead to the watermark. The output will still carry that mark as if it had been generated from scratch inside of Claude, which means that detectors cannot tell who came up with the idea, how much a human wrote, and whether the facts are correct or whether the policies inside are broken. It's just going to stamp on it, yes, Claude has had a hand on this. This is AI edited or generated. So if you use this mark as an automatic cheating verdict, which we might see inside of educational institutions, that is overstepping what Anthropic are claiming. Anthropic are just saying it's been used somewhere in the process. That's going to be misconstrued by universities and schools as soon as this detecting tool gets out into the public. Instead, we need to treat it as a fingerprint showing contact with the tool rather than an authorship certificate. The other associated problem is this, and the opposite mistake is just as bad. If a detector finds no Claude mark, that does not prove that the work is human. This is another huge issue. So this could be for a number of honest reasons. It might come from a model that was released before the marking support. So right now, the older models prior to August the 2nd, if you generate it with AI and then put it through the new detection tools Anthropic are going to be releasing, it's going to show up as not being generated by AI. That's a false negative. It might also be because the passage is too short. We have some indications that very short passages, very short outputs will not be long enough to put a definitive watermark into. Perhaps it's been heavily rewritten, translated, mixed with other text, edited. There's been some kind of obfuscation. The file's metadata might have been stripped out during some innocuous process moving through workflows, and the export path may not have support for that marking type, the metadata in particular. Or perhaps it came from an entirely different artificial intelligence altogether. We might be using the Anthropic detector to see if it was written by Claude AI, but we wrote it with ChatGPT, and it's going to flag up as, no, this was not written by artificial intelligence. So we do not know the exact method that is being used. We have been told, and there's a tweet from Tariq here, this is part of working with the EU AI Act. Other labs are adding similar watermarking. It's hard to identify AI-generated text, and this gives people better tools to do that. We will also be shipping text detection API that you can use yourself. We do not know the mechanism, but once we have that detection tool, we'll be able to probably reverse engineer it, working it out. So to make it clear, we don't have the model by model coverage table. We don't have the minimum useful passage length. We don't have any public confidence thresholds, false positive rates, false negative rates, just discussed, or a launch date date for the detector. We don't have any of these things yet. So we do know that the detector is going to be released for us. The fact that it's being released, though, is quite interesting because I think there's two plays here. So Paul Graham, for example, was talking about this. Startup idea: rephrase output to preserve the meaning while obliterating the watermarks. This may not be that big in itself, but it could make a great beachhead. They have a huge problem with synthetic data, where a lot of the new models are being trained on content on the internet. And guess what? A lot of the content on the internet has a lot of AI writing in it. A huge amount of AI writing. And this means we get basically a dog chasing its own tail with our new AI models training on past AI outputs, synthetic data. And this means that they get worse. They don't get better, they get worse. This is because they need clean data. They need data that's not generated by artificial intelligence, otherwise their models will potentially get worse and worse. So the fact that the EU has said, hey, you need to mark all of your AI outputs, that's actually kind of good for them, because they get to mark all their AI outputs. On all the companies will do this, and then they can exclude that or deprioritize that in future training runs. So they can focus on training only on human content, which makes our AIs better. It kind of deals with the synthetic data problem. And they get to point at the EU and say, they made us do it. They get the benefit of identifying and watermarking all AI content, which is quite good for them, let's be honest, without any of the blame. Anthropic is not the only one. Claude is not the only model that will have this kind of watermark on it. Any major providers have signed this, including Anthropic, Google, Meta, Microsoft, Mistral, and OpenAI. I'm actually going to pull up the OpenAI provenance signals in OpenAI generated content. This is from 11 days ago. They managed to talk about this and nobody jumped down their throat. Maybe they have more goodwill than Anthropic. Do you have plans to support text outputs? Exactly what Anthropic is doing. Exactly the same thing. Consistent with our commitments under the European Commission's Code of Practice on Transparency of AI-generated content, that is Article 50, as we've talked about, of the EU AI Act. Consistent with our commitments, our goal is to expand provenance signals to all modalities, including text, so customers and developers have clear ways to meet their own transparency obligations as standards and toolings continue to mature. Everybody is doing this. And Google have been doing this for multiple years. This is not just... It is important to note that every company is meeting these obligations in different ways. So Anthropic, for example, has a documented text watermark for supported models and C2PA metadata for supported files. That's what people are pissed off about at the moment. OpenAI, they document C2PA plus Google Synth ID on supported images and Synth ID on supported audio. They use Google system. Pretty good. As I've just shown you, they're going to extend that provenance to text over time, maybe using the Synth ID system as well. And then Google already documents Synth ID across supported text, images, video, and audio products. And it is indeed open sourced their Synth ID text model, so you can use it on your own. So Google are leading the charge here, but they're actually selling and providing this back to OpenAI, and Anthropic are now building out their own system. Then Meta, Microsoft, Mistral, etc. have also signed the provider section 2, but we don't have any product specific documentation. The only holdout, the big holdout, and the one I don't think is getting enough credit for this, if you support this, is XAI. So Elon Musk's SpaceX AI. They have refused to sign any of this. They've refused to toe the line in any way at all. Whether you think that's a good or a bad thing depends on your beliefs on the EUA Act as a whole. So I'm not going to tell you what to think about that. So there we have it. We have come from an incredibly viral tweet of 12 million views to the less exciting but far more accurate truth of the matter, which I hope will save you from spouting nonsense and looking silly on the internet or at the fancy dinner parties that you go to where you talk about artificial intelligence. My goal here at AI with Kyle is to bring you the AI news without the hype. Stop lying. So if you prefer your AI news and updates hype-free, make sure you're subscribed both here on YouTube and to my newsletter at aiwithkyle.com. Cool. Thank you guys, and I'll see you on Friday.